When you're born and raised in a neighborhood, you learn from the people in the neighborhood. You gotta understand, I was half Italian, half Jewish. My father was never around. He was basically a Jewish racketeer. But back in those days, you took numbers, you did that, you were bootlegging or whatever. And I was raised by the Italian side. And I learned from my aunts and my uncles and my cousins, and I learned from the kids in the street. I play half-ball in the street. You play football in the street. At night, you hang out on the corner with the guys. You go into Pat's Luncheonette. You play the pinball machine. 25 cents, you got 6 plays for music. You went outside, then you harmonized. So it was a family. It was growing up with people. And then when I became what I became, I used what I learned with that happiness from living in a neighborhood, which I shared with kids who I called beyond teenagers back then. I learned from talking Italian. Hey, ma come si fa questa sera? Hey, how you doing tonight, Mrs. Capuana? Ma tosta, what do you need? I've been blessed. I've been blessed because my father was what he was. My mother worked all of her life to support me and Roberta, my sister. I was a lonely kid because when the kids were playing in the street during the summertime, Roberta and myself had to be in bed at 6 o'clock at night because my mother had to get up the next morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. She was a riveter in the Navy Yard during the Second World War. She would take us up and at 6 o'clock drop us off at St. Monica's Day Nursery at 17th and Porter. So as a lonely kid, I learned how to handle myself. The street is where it all began. Listen, we lived at 1906 South Bancroft Street, but we really lived at 1534 McKean Street, my grandmother's house. We lived in my grandmother's house because she lived in St. Monica's Parish. During the daytime, when we would go to school, that house became a bookie joint. Horse racing, number business, whatever business. Tables would come out, beep, ba ba boo. Bob Horn is probably the reason that I'm in this business today. I was 13 years of age, and I saw this show called Bandstand. And I saw the show by accident because my Uncle Jimmy was a member of a group that appeared on Bandstand. So we all were watching it on McKean Street. My aunt, my mom, my grandmother, my cousins, to see Uncle Jimmy singing. But I saw that, but I saw these kids dancing. And in my neighborhood, and especially in the Italian thing, we always danced. There was always music going around. I danced with my mother. And when I saw these kids dancing, I said, and it's in the book, I could dance like that. My aunt said, nah, you can't. My other aunt looked at me and smiled. My Aunt Mim, who was Irish. And in those days, you know, you married an Irish, you're Italian. My mother married a Jewish guy. Sometimes, you know, there's a little prejudice there. But my Aunt Mim, who's still alive today, and I decided that I wanted to go up to this Bandstand show. And I went up with the guys from South Philly, Johnny Panvini, and we used to learn how to jitterbug by going out on the street. And you know, when you're waiting for the trolley car, you put your head against that pole, and you'll be able to hear if it was coming 2 blocks away. Well, I would hold on to that pole, and I would move as if it was my dance partner. So we went up the Bandstand, 46th to Market. I'm 13 years of age, 1953, and we snuck in the back because there was a line. And I was with Johnny Pambini, a couple of other guys. We went into the studio, and they had a dance contest. There was a girl by the name of Jo Mizzou, who was from the neighborhood, who I knew, who was a Bandstand regular. I saw her, and I got into the dance contest. We won the dance contest. Now, nobody knows at that time that I'm only 13 years of age. Now I'm almost like a regular. And they have another dance contest. I get in it, I win it. By this time, I'm getting fan mail. I'm getting all kinds of notoriety. Back in the neighborhood, hey, it's Jerry Blavat. We saw you dancing, beat with Bob. Hey, I said, wow, I love this style, man. I love all of this notoriety. Bob Horn says to me, with Tony Marmarella, they find out that I am not 14. He says, did you sneak into Bandstand? How old are you? I said, I'm 13. I never lied. I said, 13. He said, you know, you shouldn't have been here, but you're getting fan mail. You're so popular. Tell you what we would like you to do. You know the dancers. Don't get in any more dance contests. We're going to make you the head of the dance committee. You will pick out the good dancers as regulars and rotate the kids from the bleachers. Because every 10 minutes for camera, they would take kids from the bleachers, put them on the dance floor, get the dance floor up on the bleachers. So all of a sudden, I'm now the head of the dance committee. I would go from school, I'd get out of Newman, I was a freshman. I get out of, at that time it was Southeast Catholic. I get out of school, 2:15, jump on the subway, Market Street, 46th Street, Bandstand went on at 3:30. I would be there at 3 o'clock. Bob would say to me, now look, besides being the head of the dance committee, you know music, because I always was into music. He said, we're going to rate the record. Go and pick me songs. Here's a song by Pat Boone called Ain't It a Shame. Here's a song by Georgia Gibbs called Tweedledee. I said, Bob, this is not the original song. He said, well, this is the song that the distributor gave me. I said, Bob, it's a cover, because I used to listen to Georgie Woods and Jocko when I was a kid, and they played the original version. So I used to go to Sunray Drugstore, and they used to have racks and racks of records, and they allowed me to go and play the record. Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, Annie Had a Baby, Working With Me, Annie. Well, Georgia Gibbs covered it, called The Wallflower, Dance With Me, Henry. So Horn said, okay, get me the original record. So all of a sudden, Bob Horn is playing Ain't That a Shame by Fats Domino, not Pat Boone. Tutti Frutti by Little Richard. And I am now selecting the music. Not only am I selecting the music, but also as the head of the committee, I have to take care of the guest. The show goes on at 3:30. There's Tony Bennett. There's the DeCastro sisters. There's Joni James. And I'm the little guy beside dancing that gets off the dance floor and goes to the side where they're waiting and say, okay, Tony, when Bob Horn says we have company, that's where you sit. That's your mark. This was show business to me, man. Bob Horn became a second father to me. I met all these wonderful people. And I meet a little black guy who's in town doing a play, Mr. Wonderful. His name is Sammy Davis. He's over there. I get off the dance floor. I get off the floor. I say, Mr. Davis, that's where you're supposed to be. He says to me, wait, where'd you learn how to dance like that? And I looked at him. I said, everybody dances in South Philadelphia. We dance to impress the girls. He said to me, man, you're like a little white me. I said, back then, oh, okay. We became friends ever since. Weekends, my father was never around. I would go with Bob Horn and his family up to Levittown. Summertime, he had a boat called the Bandstand. He had a dock in Stone Harbor. I would be with him summertime. I would live on the boat. I would be his cabin boy. He was a second father to me. And when he lost the show, and I was told when he lost the show, we didn't think he had lost the show. He got arrested for DUI. And at that time, Bandstand was a radio show on WFIL in the morning. The TV show was in the afternoon. He was allowed to do the radio show, but not the TV show. They said until the heat dies down. So I am told by Tony Marmarella, Bob will be back in a couple of weeks. Your duties are the same. I was getting paid $15 a week, by the way, for everything that I was doing. So I continued with the guest stars. Tony Marmarella took Bob's place. 2 weeks later, Tony says to me, Bob's not coming back. What happened? He's not coming back. His replacement is going to be Dick Clark. Now, Dick Clark at that time was doing commercials, Bars, Diamond Theater. Good-looking kid, young. I said, no. He said, we got to meet Dick Clark. So I meet Dick Clark. And I meet Roger Klipp and Jack Steck and George Kohler. These are the powers at Triangle, WFIL, radio and TV. And Dick says, Jerry, your duties will be the same. I want you to be the head of the committee, select the records, take care of the guest stars. I said, no. We want Bob Horn back. They say, Bob Horn's not coming back. This show will go national. You will get not only $15 while it's locally $15, you'll get $30 when it goes national. I said, I don't want the money. The day that he was about to take over, I went outside. I got all the kids. We got pickets, and we picketed. We want Bob Horn. Now, this is like a half an hour before he's supposed to go on the air. There's no kids. I'm outside with the kids with the signs. Next thing I know, the cops come. They arrest me. And that's the end of my bandstand days. But I stayed with Bob Horn. And I went to Houston, Texas with Bob Horn. When he got a job, he changed his name to Bob Adams on a radio station called Kilt, which, by the way, Kilt was the first format radio station in America, owned by McLendon, okay? Houston, Texas. And he was drinking pretty good back then. He was a lost guy, because we read that Bandstand in August of '56 is going national. You can see. But here's a man that, without this guy, I would have never met. I would have never been introduced to show business. I lived with him, Levittown, with his wife, the kids, Ann, Pinky. He would take me to the nightclubs to see in Wildwood the Manor Country Club, Manor Supper Club, and I'd be with Patty Page. I'd take pictures with Patty Page. I'd be on the boat with Tony Bennett. I'd see Sammy Davis when he was at the Latin Casino. So this was the guy that introduced me to show business. And after he lost the show, in the book, I was hanging around with Nat Sigel, who was his partner. They used to do shows at the Academy of Music in the 40s. Nat owned a club called the Downbeat. So Bob Horn was not there. Nat Sigel now was there. And after school, I would go up to Nat Sigel's office. He was managing at that time Sandy Stewart, Gloria Mann, Mickey Marlowe. So he was in show business. And I was always a street kid. My mother always knew that I would do the right thing, okay? And so I would come home late after school, go up to Nat's office, and he'd be on the phone with Don Costa and J.P. Morgan. And I loved that action. And he would say, I learned from my father and the Jewish guys. They would hang at Broad and Locust, Lou Tendler's. They'd have suits and ties. They'd be drinking scotch and soda. I'd go back in South Philadelphia, and the Italian guys were playing bocce, okay, hanging on the corner, smoking stogies, smoking cigars, cigarettes, whatever. But the Jewish guys were sharp. And one thing about me, which God bless my mother, she made sure that when I would go out on Bandstand, that I was dressed to the T. And that came from my mother, and that came from my father. So I always looked up to the Jewish guys that were very, very sharp. So I was older than my age. I would hang at 13th and Locust when I was 17, 18 years of age, sneaking into the clubs back then. Frank Palumbo had 4 different clubs under one liquor license at 13th and Locust. The SA Club, the Hideaway, the 20th Century. And because of Bandstand, I was known in Philadelphia. I was known by the people who used to see me dance, and I was always in town. So Nat says, new comedian, I want you to take care of him. It was Don Rickles. He lived at the Sylvania Hotel, right around the corner from the Celebrity Room. And I became his guardian. I would watch over him at the end of the show. He was scared to death. You go out first. Go out the side door first, the stage door. See if anybody's waiting for me. Because his act was so crazy back then that people figured they want to beat him up. And we would go to the RDA Club with Don Battles. I would go to the Latimer Club, which was owned by Big Bill Rothstein. It was the Sinatra, with a complete, everything was Sinatra, Sinatra, Sinatra. And at that time, Don did a movie before he became famous called Run Silent, Run Deep, with Clark Gable and Burt Lancaster. Burt Lancaster. And I met Burt years later with Frank Sinatra when Burt was doing the movie Atlantic City, okay, with Susan Sarandon, right? Right. And I was with Frank and I met Burt. That's a funny story. It's in the book. But anyway, I am now Don Rickles' valet. I'm taking care of him. When he leaves town, he gives me a cashmere sweater. Well, I sold the cashmere sweater to guys downtown to make money. I shot pool, so I hustled money from the cashmere sweater, okay? Now, Nat says, Danny and the Juniors at the Hop. Want you to go on the road with them. I become the road manager for Danny and the Juniors. They have a #1 record at the Hop. Now I'm going from town to town. Back then you jump on a bus with Buddy Holly back then, Paul Anka back then, Frankie Lyman back then, Margie Rayburn back then, the Ponytails back then, the Everly Brothers back then, and you would do one-nighters. Almost like the big band era, okay? But now it's rock and roll. So I'm handling their money. I'm 17 years old, 18 years old. So we go into New York City to do Dick Clark's Little Theater, which was the IFIC Peach Nut Gum Show. He had a Saturday night show from 7:30 to 8 o'clock. Now Dick sees me, and I see Dick. I know that Dick has the publishing on At the Hop, because at that time there was nothing wrong with disc jockeys having a piece of the record industry. There was no law against it. He sees me, I see him. He knows that I am the road manager of Danny and the Juniors. And I say to myself, this is the first time I've seen him since 1956. I wonder how he's going to react. Very cordial. Jerry, how are you? Fine. Beep, bop, bop. I stay over in New York City at the Forest Hotel, 49th Street. Used to be a little church there called St. Malachi's, an actress chapel. And I would get up early in the morning and I would go to the church, and then I'm coming back to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Station. Getting on the train. Who's getting on the train? Dick Clark. He says, Jerry, sit with me. I figure, oh boy. Sit on the train. And he starts to talk. He says, you know, I really wasn't that big of a fan of Bob's. He said, but I got to tell you something. You were the most popular kid on Bandstand. You got fan mail. You could have been what's happening right now. And these kids at this time were in all the teen magazines. Arlene Sullivan, all these kids now were national stars. He said, we offered you double what Bob offered you. And I'm just listening. I'm thinking, okay, man. And he's going to say, whatever. He says, you know, I have publishing on At the Hop. I said, I know that, Mr. Clark. He says, but the reason I'm saying this to you, he said, I know that if I lose Bandstand tomorrow, all of these record guys that were with Bob, who are now with me, giving me this, giving me that, if I lose Bandstand tomorrow, and the new host comes in, they're going to jump and go with the new host. He said, I have great respect for the loyalty that you had for Bob Horn. When we got off the train, I said, Dick, from this day on, you have my loyalty. Because I appreciated the fact that he understood where I was coming from. And to the day he died, when I went out to Malibu, Dick Clark was my friend. Even to this day today, I send his wife, Carrie, macaroni from Toledo's, okay? And there's so many great stories with Dick. When he was going through a problem with his first wife, okay, Barbara, he would call me up in South Philly, and he would come to my home, okay? We'd cook South Philadelphia. My mother would cook. And he was living at that time at the Parkway House. And he would call me up 10 o'clock at night. Come on, let's go get a drink. And we would go to the Vesper Club. This is when he was having, not financial problems, he was marital problems. Sinatra is playing at the 500 Club. Sinatra movie is also on the boardwalk at the Capitol. I believe that Rickles was at the Globe, 2 theaters on the boardwalk. After the premiere, Rickles says to Nat and me, come on, we're going to go over and see Sinatra. So we went. Skinny, my dad knew Skinny, I mean, because, you know, Skinny was Skinny, my dad was my dad, and all that stuff. And so we go in through the side, through the kitchen, and there's Frank Sinatra. So Rickles says, Frank, I want you to meet Jerry Blavat. Sinatra looks at me and says, oh, Matchstick. Nice meeting you. Oh, thank you, Mr. Sinatra. When we leave the 500, Rickles says to me, Schmuck, don't you know what that was? I said, it was Frank Sinatra. He said, you're not impressed? I said, listen, if it would have been Chuck Berry or Little Richard or Fats Domino, I would have been impressed. Because Sinatra at that time was not our music. Right. Rock and roll was our music. Danny and the Juniors, Little Richard, Fats Domino. And that's how we became friends, and that's when I first met Frank. Angelo Bruno, I never saw these guys do anything wrong. Angelo Bruno would walk down the street, people would say, hello, Mr. Bruno. He'd tip his hat, how are you, how's your family? If I walk in with a priest all the time, does that mean I'm going to be a priest? I'm going to go to St. Charles Borromeo? If I'm hanging with a banker all the time, does that mean I'm going to be a banker? I hang with doctors and lawyers. That doesn't make me a lawyer or a doctor. I always listen and I want to learn from people that are much smarter than I am. I've always been inquisitive that way. When Angelo got killed, and I spent, after Patty and I split, I spent time having dinner at the house, driving him when he wanted to go see the grandkids up in Radnor. I was that close to that family. The holidays, I would be there with the Maggios. I mean, and they were wonderful people. So when Angelo got killed, Michael Bruno said to me with Sue, look, you're almost like a part of our family. You know the reporters, you know the people from the press, you know the police, law enforcement that have always been following him. Please, would you be a part of the family? Keep them away from South Philadelphia burial, okay? I had to make a decision. I said to myself, if I do that, the press is now, I'm going to be exposed to not only the press, but law enforcement saying, how come this guy was so close to this man who was reputed to be the head of the mob? I said to myself, I know this is going to happen, but this guy and this family, they need me. They were my second family when I split, and I made the decision. I was right. After Angelo died, I was intense investigations going on, where my money was coming from, who I was with, what I did, and I answered everything, and they never found anything wrong, because I've always done the right thing. I've always done the right thing. And again, as I said, none of my business what you do. You're my friend, you're my friend. But if you do something wrong that jeopardizes our friendship, then you're not my friend. It's that simple. Olga Rivera. I was doing a TV show, and everybody would hang at the Elan, which is the old Warwick Hotel. And I always was out every night when I wasn't working, okay? And Olga had a modeling school called Olga's Modeling Agency. So when I did a TV show, I needed models. And I met Olga through Monty Rock III, who was Puerto Rican, and Olga was Puerto Rican, so they knew each other from Puerto Rico. So I used her models, and I wind up inviting her and wind up getting involved with Olga, who was amazing. I mean, really dashing, and limousines. But I didn't know that she was married at that time. And she was married to a guy who was very wealthy. And I used to say to myself, Olga, where you getting this? And she bought me a ring and beep it bop bop bop. I said, where you get? Oh no, I'm very successful. Beep beep it bop. I've got my own makeup line. Beep, and it was really hot and heavy. Until I found out she was married. You sit with Bruce Bryan and Al Hollander, and they say, what would be your concept to do a TV show? I said, well, first of all, I'm a dancer. I am not going to stand behind a podium with a suit and tie. What are you going to call it? I said, well, we're going to dance to disc. These are disc I play. Disc? What do you mean? A phonic. The sound, the excitement of rock and roll on disc, the discophonic sound. And man, the moment that show hit, it hit in March of '65. It started out as a half-an-hour show. 2 weeks later, it went to an hour. I sold it to Lip Brothers, Mountain Dew, Canoe at that time, was it Cologne? Pepsi, and boom. Yep, syndicated 45 markets. When I bought Memories in 1962, I bought it for $200,000, okay? When the New Jersey law enforcement guys, after Angelo died, they actually didn't realize that I was making over $100,000 in the early 60s to the end of the 60s. They didn't realize that I made a lot of money. The record hops were bringing in over $80,000, $90,000 a year. You're talking about 2,000 kids, $1 a head. So when I bought Memories, which was my money, which I made a deal with Paul Patriarch, Central Penn at that time, they thought that the mob gave me the money to buy Memories. They were amazed that I made all that kind of money when I was in my early 20s. It was called Memories because they would come back again to relive the memories that they had when they first came in to the club. And we get people from 21 to 95. My life has been bringing people together, making people happy. The reason I wrote that book, I wanted young people to understand that if you come from a broken home, if you come from the streets, if you have dignity, respect, and loyalty, and if you dream of something, that's your special dream. Don't let anybody stop you. If you've got the passion, go for it, man.
Oh, good night, my love, until tomorrow then. Good night, my love, until tomorrow when I hold you in my arms. Oh, good night,
If you would like to see more of my interviews, please check out my website, jrinterviews.com.